Well, first of all, thank you for coming. I'm going to have to project. And forgive me if I keep drinking water, because I just had a class and I'm going to one afterwards. So I have to keep my voice relatively intact. A class about the corporation would seem to be something of an anomaly on a day that's devoted in the main, if you look at most of the presentations, to civil rights and race and social justice or social injustice. Among subjects like the working poor, the disabled, or the racially discriminated, you would think then that the corporation looks like something like this kind of clueless blue blood who's chattering on a headset, and he boards the wrong flight and registers at the wrong convention. But that's precisely why I've chosen to invite the corporation into what seems to be a gathering for the subaltern and the oppressed. Because sometimes it seems to me that the plainest facts are the most difficult ones to see. And one of the plainest facts is that the corporation, which is the institutional centerpiece of modern capitalism, is very simply the pivotal economic and political actor of our time. Love it. I'm hating this. I'm going to close the door. Doesn't get back in. Love it, hate it, or most certainly overwork for it, the business corporation is the Leviathan of the 21st century. In fact, I think that if that famous frontispiece of Hobbes' Leviathan were updated, the figure would sport a suit and a tie, it would wield not a sword and a scepter, but a cell phone and a BlackBerry. When this 800-pound gorilla is recognized in the room, there's debate over how to treat it. To its admirers, and I'm assuming that there must be some admirers of the business corporation in here, the business corporation mobilizes all the technological and scientific and organizational prowess that provides us with our food, our clothing, our shelter, and what seems to be the apparently inexhaustible supply of commodities that we have. In this view, the corporation simply humbly serves the sovereign consumer in the unregulated market. And so the corporation represents the triumph not simply of capitalism, but also of democracy. Now, to its detractors, the corporation is this huge and unacknowledged tyranny. It's a gargantua who wastes and despoils the planet's ecology. It's a globe-encircling syndicate of avarice and exploitation. Well, I just want to say that corporations are people too. Quite literally. That's not a smirking irony. It is on a bumper sticker. It is legal reality. Or more precisely, it's a legal fiction whose enactment has all sorts of material and cultural and political implications. In American law, the corporation is a person. Wal-Mart, Microsoft, and Halliburton stand alongside you and me before the blindfolded lady holding the scales. Now, there's a really complicated and fascinating history behind this, some of which I'm only going to sketch today, but it remains a fact which I think with which Americans have yet to even understand, let alone confront. Now, what I want to do is relate a brief history of the legal fiction of corporate personhood and discuss some of the real weirdness, let alone injustice, that stems from this, and suggest some alternatives to the current legal and political structure of corporate governance. And in some sense, what I want to argue is ironic, given the theme of these talks today, which is that the achievement of social justice in this case requires that we limit rights, that we curtail rights, even take them away from certain entities. Now, to set the stage, I want to start with this really unlikely but illuminating source, and that is medieval political theory. In order to understand the modern corporation, you have to understand something about medieval political theory. Now, there's this great medievalist named Ernest Kantorowicz, and he wrote a book entitled The King's Two Bodies. All right. Now, medieval kingship rested on not just swords, but also metaphysics. Any kind of political rule, folks, rests on a metaphysic of some kind. You may not be aware of it, but you're all metaphysicians in some sense. Now, the medieval king had two bodies. One was called the body natural, right? And that was the monarch's actual physical body, right? The body that was liable to infirmity and death. But there was also the medieval king's body politic. All right. Now that consisted of policy and government. And that couldn't therefore be subject to this kind of natural maladies of sickness and death. In short, medieval kingship was a legal fiction. It was a legal political fiction. And it was also, as Kantorowicz recognized, a religious fiction as well. Kantorowicz wrote, in fact, quote, "This man-made irreality, indeed that strange construction of a human mind which finally becomes slave to its own fictions, we are normally more ready to find in the religious sphere than in the allegedly sober and realistic realms of law." Now, to most of us, medieval kingship is pretty musty and it's quaint and it doesn't have anything to do with us. But it's worth recalling that it once had the full force of law. And I think we can see a very similar irreality in the allegedly more sober and supposedly secular realms of economics and corporate law. Now, the rise of the modern corporation certainly resulted from business ingenuity and technological change and class struggle, but it also resulted from the legal imagination of capitalism. And because legal notions of responsibility are rooted in some kind of a notion of moral agency, in order for you to be held responsible for something, there has to be some sort of a conception of what it means to be an agent, of what it means to be able to do something. We can say that the creation of the modern corporation is a study in the metaphysics of personality. In order for us to understand our notions of the corporation, we have to understand what a person is, because if it's a person under law, we have to know what a person is. And that question, what is a person, was actually triggered by the Industrial Revolution in the United States in the 19th century. And here's why. If you go back in American history to the early 19th century, all right, corporations were clearly understood to be public institutions. You know, we talk about private enterprise in the United States. A corporation, by definition, is not private enterprise. All right? It is collectively owned. It's owned by a variety of people, which makes it, strangely enough, a socialist enterprise. I'll come back to that. And they were regulated and created by state legislatures. We also tend to forget this. A corporation is a creation of a public body, democratically elected. The implications of that I'm going to come back to at the end of this talk. Corporations in the early 19th century were created by state legislative charters. And they specified their objectives and their dates of termination. When you created a corporation in, say, 1834, you specified the date on which that corporation began and the date on which it would end. There would be no more Microsoft after such date. As an 1832 treatise on corporate law put it, quote, "The design of the corporation is to provide for some good that is useful to the public," end quote.